So Ed, welcome to 60 Road Studios.
Thank you for having me.
Just for the people listening or watching, I've known Ed for 8 or 9 years. I have a social enterprise restaurant that donates money to educational causes, and so I think we made our first donation around 7 or 8 years ago to SeeBeyondBorders, and have stayed in touch since then and continue to try to support you where we can.
A huge thank you. It's been fantastic. Thanks you.
So maybe I'll just jump straight into it. Can you tell me when you first came to Cambodia and what it was like then versus now?
Gosh, the first time we came, 2022 we are now. It's 2002, 20 years ago in January. And we did come to Siem Reap as well that time just to go to visit the temples. But I mean, I'd grown up in India, so I was familiar with developing countries in that sense, but it seemed there were very few tourists around, not very many foreigners. The roads were awful, and to get from Phnom Penh to Siem Reap, you either had to go by boat or fly, as far as I remember. Visiting the temples was great, actually, in some ways, because you could go anywhere, see anything, and there weren't many people here. But certainly we had been in Kampong Som, and there was still all of the Sinukville, there was still all of the relics of the Khmer Rouge time, burnt out hotels, empty beaches, and some really poor communities living right near the centre of town at that time. Probably completely unrecognisable from today. And today, just the cars on the roads. Siem Reap's obviously changed hugely just in the last couple of years. Just the quality of the buildings. Particularly in towns, probably less of a change in the rural areas in a sense, but you've still got roads. The schools we visit now, many of them would be on bitumen roads versus dirt roads, etc. before. So yes, in terms of general levels of perceived prosperity, there's been a huge change.
Okay. And then you decided to establish SeeBeyondBorders. That was a few years later? Or?
Yeah, so when we first came, 20 years ago, our children were, 7, 11 and 13, something like that in terms of ages. And of course, add 20 years to that number, they're all grown up. One of them's married. But when we first came, with no intention of coming to set up an NGO or anything like that, I think we were just completely blown away by what we saw, and probably had one of those kind of we can save the world types of moments in that sense that I guess we can be forgiven for, I hope. And just thought, what on earth can we do, really, I suppose, initially. And then continued to work with the NGO that had brought us in the first place for a while. But that was never really enough. We wanted to try and do something more where we thought that we could better utilise our skills, I suppose. Kate was a teacher. My background is accounting, finance. So yes, it took 6 years before we actually started SeeBeyondBorders from the 2020.
Okay.
2002 experience, yeah.
And since establishing SeeBeyondBorders, how has education changed here in Cambodia?
It's not really changed hugely, I suppose. I think that the big thing that's changed is the access. With the infrastructure development that I alluded to in the first place, schools now have more substantive buildings, access is easier, there are just more schools anyway. It doesn't look as if the roof is going to fall in on the kids in every school that you go to. But the problem is the quality hasn't improved. We work obviously in rural schools, so it's kind of quite a specific reference point for where we are. But when you look at the national results, the ones that the ministry published in 2018, you've still got less than 3%. Less than 3%. That means over 97% of children are not reaching minimum proficiency levels in science, maths, or literacy, which really, it's a rounding error. So after 30 years of education, we're still at that level. But the resounding success is access. You've got nearly every eligible child is able to go and goes to register in school at the very beginning. The problem is, without the quality there, then there's a huge dropout. And probably the only other trend that's really worth talking about is the level of privatization of education. You know, many people, as prosperity has grown, have selected to go to private schools. So you've got a massive increase in that sector in that time.
I suppose.
An example.
Yeah, I suppose right from the very beginning, this absolute classic. You know, we're going to try and tackle. We're going to try and do something about education. Well, we've talked to lots of people, and teachers don't know very much about how to teach in the classroom. Well, we can do something to help with that. So we'll run some workshops, and we'll teach teachers how to teach. You know. And we'll do it in maths because obviously we didn't have any Khmer skills at that time, and that would be the medium. It was great. So we brought a whole lot of teachers from Australia to come and to run these workshops, and we had an absolute ball. You know, the Khmers absolutely loved the opportunity. We had some translators, and we thought that, you know, we'd really lifted the spirits of the teachers and given them a sense of the importance of what they did, etc. Anyway, so a few months later, we'd go out to the schools, you know, and we'd given them these bright yellow bags full of resources that they could use, and to go out to the schools, and there's the resource bag kind of hanging on the peg, you know, and the rat has taken up residence in the resource bag because they've never been taken out the sort of free food of all this plastic for the rats to eat, and you watch the teachers teaching, and there's absolutely no change from when you went to see them before. And you sit down and say, you know, but you came to the workshop and all of those things, you know, didn't. What did you think? And they said, we had an absolute ball. We loved it. We loved hearing about how you teach in Australia. And there was kind of that complete disconnect between, you know, what we were inviting Cambodian teachers to experience and adopt, complete disconnect from that versus, you know, the show that they came to and the games that they played and the fun that they had, but that had nothing to do with what actually went on in their schools. So, I mean, I think that was kind of one of the biggest lessons to really say how you engage with teachers, and that's probably been the kind of underlying problem or underlying challenge all the way through the work that we've done, and the reason why we've tried other programs and added other programs to the basic, you know, teach the teacher kind of model that we started with.
Yeah. And in terms of once you'd spent time working out what was successful way in terms of upskilling the teachers, obviously the next issue then becomes, how do you roll this out in a larger way?
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the challenges there?
Well, we started with maths, and then we, you know, after this whole thing of realization that actually we hadn't changed a thing by running this workshop, we then went on and developed a mentoring program to actually help teachers in their classrooms. So make it much more personal, direct to what they were doing. And now, you know, mentoring is on the national agenda. I mean, we won an award in, I'm not going to get the year right, 2017, I think it was, from UNESCO for our programs, particularly around the mentoring aspect of it. And I remember coming to the office, and Sapen, I think it was, showed me this email that purported to come from the UN congratulating us on winning this award, and just saying, Sapen, that's a piece of junk mail. Don't even worry about it. And then getting a call from somebody who worked in Phnom Penh for one of the major organisations, saying, "Oh, congratulations, SeeBeyondBorders has won this award," and everybody's asking me, "Who's SeeBeyondBorders? We've never heard of them." And that was when we got to the sort of national conversations around mentoring and how to change practice in the classroom. So that, that was a really big plus. And then probably subsequent to that, we've been asked by lots of people about, okay, literacy. We can't, with reading levels so poor, you mentioned some of those stats before, how do we help the children read? And Kate was the one that really kind of took this on board and thought, well, she was remembering when she first started to teach, and when she first started to teach in kindergarten, which is like the first year in school in Australia, and how she spoke to the teacher who had been teaching before and said, how do I teach these children to read? That's how do I do that? And as she recalls, she said, well, the teacher before said, all you have to do is go through the process, and actually they'll learn anyway, despite you. They'll learn. And so she developed resources and processes and has always been really fascinated by literacy, particularly. So she took it on as a bit of a challenge. Okay, so how do I use this process that we have in Australia, in a sense? And I need to be careful about that because it's obviously not the process exactly in Australia. But how do I make that relevant to Khmer? And I just remember waking up in bed so often to Kate sitting on YouTube watching videos about Khmer, and Welcome to Cambodia School was my early morning call for years. I think she spent like probably 2 years learning the basics about how the Cambodian language fits together, and then using the rules. And she obviously had a huge amount of help and support from our team, where she'd say, look, I think this is a rule. Do you know this is a rule? And of course, because Cambodians have been largely taught to read by rote, they don't necessarily know what the rules are. And they'd say, well, look, I've never heard of that, but I'll see if I can think of any exceptions to it. And of course, Kate would be the first one to say that in some cases they weren't rules, but she gradually kind of built the basic rules of the language and then turned that into a literacy program, which she and another Australian teacher actually taught in a school for 12 months. So she went to go to school every day, worked with the teacher in the classroom, an interpreter for the SeeBeyondBorders, well, not an interpreter, one of our staff in SeeBeyondBorders. And the results were absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. The vast majority of the children in the class could read as a function of that, and really everybody was kind of blown away. But the interesting thing was they weren't really blown away to the extent that they would then adopt that methodology themselves, because they weren't motivated by the fact that the children could read. They were much more embedded in the systems and processes and the kind of what the ministry had told them to do. And this was kind of quite a significant departure from that. So they valued the systems and processes and what the ministry had told them more than actually getting the children to read. And it has been extremely difficult to work out how to work with the teachers to say, to work with them to work with them to try to help them feel it's important that the children learn more than necessarily they follow a particular pattern and system, because teaching is all about getting children to learn rather than necessarily following a pattern of some sort or other. So again, it's that question of focusing on the impact rather than focusing on the process. And I've almost forgotten what you asked me in the first place. Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about the literacy program.
Is there anything more you want to say there? I was gonna ask you about.
Well, you asked me how do you replicate it and how do you
scale
it? So that's obviously a really big challenge, and there are two things that we've done for that. You need people who are prepared to take it on and teach it and get other teachers to take it on. So we've started a change makers program, which is really developing women in every case to be leaders in the education field. And we're not teaching them how to be teachers necessarily, but we're teaching them how to support, encourage, and develop teachers. So we're teaching them how to be adult educators, I suppose, rather than in the classroom. And we're teaching them particularly around methodologies in maths and in literacy and in mentoring. And in fact, now that schools are open, they go out to school every morning and work with a teacher in school, and they'll be doing that for the next 12 months. So that's kind of growing the people side of things. And the other part of it is technology, really, is part of the challenge of the literacy program had been cutting up all the resources. And we've got 22 teachers involved in the program now and delivering them all the resources on a regular basis and the books and everything to support the program. And so we're putting that all onto tablets so that we can upload the information, the daily lesson plans and the resources to the tablets for the teachers on a regular basis. We can get feedback. We can understand what they use and what they don't use. And in addition to the tablets, they've got a projector in their classroom, and the tablet talks to the projector so they can project the resources, the books, etc., onto the walls of their classroom. And even in a very poor quality classroom, you can put a whiteboard on the edge of the classroom and use the projector in those kind of circumstances. There's obviously challenges in terms of availability of Wi-Fi and those kind of things, but generally speaking, the schools where we're working, those kind of technology problems are largely getting solved. So we think that having these tablets and teaching around the tablet for teachers so that you've got the resource, you've got the program all there, just follow it in that sense is the way that we're going to be able to push it out more widely through partner organisations and people who actually want to subscribe to this methodology. Probably the third piece perhaps is, how do you get people to buy into the fact that actually children can read just as they can in any other language, because people are used to the fact that they can't read. They're actually quite used to the fact that children coming out of grade 3 or grade 4 just simply still can't read. So we need to get over the message that that's unacceptable, and that really every child has the right to be taught how to read, and that's perfectly possible. It doesn't matter what school or what socioeconomic background you come from, you can read in your own language. And you don't have to revert to English to go onto an English stream school and learn in English. You can learn your own language first. So.
Okay. And obviously in scaling these programs, you work quite closely with the Ministry of Education.
We do. Yes, we do. It's very important. They have a very they very focused approach on what they want teachers to do, to embrace. I think they're obviously very concerned about the sorts of results that they're getting, and they recognise they've got a very big, a very long road to upskilling teachers, albeit that they're starting with these education colleges. There's still a long road till you get substantive change. So they're still a little bit preoccupied by the one size fits all. So they're still very process orientated. So little old SeeBeyondBorders saying, well, hang on, actually, if you did it this way, it would actually be much better, is something that they struggle to get their heads around. And we have quite a lot of conversations around little things like, does a letter in Khmer have a sound? Those kind of little things still are challenges in the communication between us. And there are many people doing some really great things in the Ministry of Education.
So can you tell me a little more about what SeeBeyondBorders priorities are today?
Yeah, so really kind of post-COVID, I suppose, where we've been actually all, since we've been back, we've been all together to try to think about, okay, really what is the next phase for SeeBeyondBorders? We've proved what works, what can be done, and now the challenge is, okay, how are we actually going to roll this out? How are we going to find the people to support the programs, etc.? And Kate and I are going to be stepping back during this year. Sort of end of June, it'll be a complete handover to a different team. A team who we've been working with and supporting here. Significant amount of local ownership, local responsibility. We've got several organisations in the kind of SeeBeyondBorders family. We've got the operation here in Cambodia, which has been a branch of Australia. So we're going to set up the local organisation here. And then we've got entities in Ireland and the UK that have all come under sort of an umbrella management structure, but now are going to be more autonomous units all supporting into Cambodia. So working through how that'll work. But to go back to your original question, from a programming point of view, we've kind of looked at trying to get this digitalization of our resources and our programs and our processes worked through with training support, so that the teacher has everything from how to teach the particular lesson through to how to support, through to the resources that they need, and then their own personal and CPD development and the monitoring of that. And probably the other thing that underlies those things is an assessment process for their class. Assessment being such a challenge in Cambodia in terms of levels, etc., that assessment needs to be done at. So that's the kind of digitalization thing of the maths, of the literacy, and of the mentoring process. So we try to get tablets into the hands of teachers and to mentors who can then oversee the development of teachers. And then the next kind of key piece is the people point of view, is expanding and developing our change makers program. What does that look like? What jobs will we have for people? What do we hope for their careers into the future? And then how can we link that program with other people in education in Cambodia, so that we can provide opportunities for people into other organisations beyond our own. Of course, initially we hope that people will stay with us. We've got a real thirst for people who've got educational real competencies. And then when you move on from that, we've been talking about embedding processes such as mentoring within the country. It's extremely difficult. We've worked very hard on that. We're moving towards this kind of model where we work with people who actually want to work with us. So it's not a question of, well, here you go, this is what you've got to do. It's people coming to us and saying, I can see that by following this process, children are really learning. Can you help us with that process? So that because children in our school, families in our school really want education to work for them. And then the sort of other important supporting piece around that is the research that backs up those assertions that these things actually work. So trying to get some additional independent research going, and then also the profiling part, so that we can get the messages out there better than we have before about how important education is. These are the things that are on offer for people, for communities. Kind of, we really want to engage with you in ways that perhaps we haven't so far. So that's the kind of the suite of things that we're trying to do within this context of well, I guess we'd call it localization, not only in Cambodia but in other countries. I think empowerment is actually a better word. Excuse me. Getting the people who
are on the ground in those countries, responsible for the work of those countries, whether that be Cambodia, where the programs will happen, or Australia, UK, Ireland, where they know the market as to who's interested to support us.
Okay. And what was the driving factor behind localization? Was it empowerment or additional factors?
I think that kind of, of course, there's always been whispering about founders syndrome, and our own children will tell you that SeeBeyondBorders is kind of child number 4, and they probably all think that we've invested in child number 4 far more than we had in children 1, 2, and 3. I guess we've never really seen Cambodia as our home in that sense. It's been the place that we've come to work, and we've loved it. We've loved the privileges of working with Cambodians here. But in the longer term, our futures with our own families in some way or another. So there had to come a time when we said, okay, we need to make a bit of a break from this, and we need to give people who've worked with us the opportunity to take it in directions that they think's appropriate. And it just felt like the right time. It's the mood, if you like, also within the development sector, of recognizing the importance of empowering people locally, the importance of stepping back and not sort of colonizing places through another method. And ultimately, everything we try to do with education is about empowering people and giving them freedom, helping them discern choices, etc. So this is part of that process, really, to be able to do that and put a different structure in place, as the organization grows and as the sort of mum and dad figures disappear into the background. Of course, we're proud to be part of it into the future, but our roles will be definitely different.
Okay. And what do you see as the future for SeeBeyondBorders and maybe education in Cambodia?
I think that SeeBeyondBorders needs to prepare for the time when it can't rely on money from donors to run the programs. I hope that it maintains this idea of progress as more important than process or projects. I hope that it maintains this notion that fair wage for a fair bit of work, but why you're here is because of how you can support your country and your people. I hope those values persist, but I also recognise that there isn't going to be money from international donors to support the programs long into the future. And if you look at how support to education works in developed countries, that's over the horizon, and the ability to charge people is something that has to begin to build into the psyche of how SeeBeyondBorders works. I'm not suggesting it becomes immediately a fee for service, far from it, but it needs to think about how, as privatization of schools becomes the trend in Cambodia, you can't kick against that and just sort of die at the feet of public education. It needs to work out how to do that, and there's opportunities to work with private schools and use the money, etc., that comes from that to support those who don't have the financial wherewithal to do that, but absolutely deserve a public education. So I see that model of those sorts of changes as being something to be embraced rather than feared.
And what does that mean for public education in Cambodia?
I think that's a really excellent question, and I don't know the answer. I think that the Ministry of Education has been frustrated by the intransigence of change, and the fact that there is so much more information publicly available now about performance in schools is a really good thing. It's stark, but we've often said you need to understand the problem if you're going to try to work towards a solution, and there is a much greater understanding of the problem. The challenge comes in, well, how do you leave no child behind kind of mantra, and the solutions that are being looked at here is this idea of new generation schools, so being really quite selective about the schools that get the support, and they become models for how education might work, and ultimately therefore support and create the demand amongst poorer communities to say, actually, I want better education for my children. I mean, many parents, of course, in rural areas are illiterate or have a poor education themselves, so they don't really know what good education looks like. So they've got to kind of create these things that not only the private schools, wealthy private schools in town, but other schools that they can understand what that looks like, and be part of the driving force for change in their own communities. You can't simply rely on being told, I guess. So I struggle with what's for public education in Cambodia. I mean, we always came with a view of really wanting to help people who were, I won't say something trite as the poorest of the poor, and we could never do that, but we wanted to do what we could for the people who clearly were the people who were really missing out from the privatization process. But I do fear a little bit for them for the future. What I do know is we have things that work. Now they have to want it for it to be able to happen. We can't simply be the ones to tell people what they should have in any shape or form. So what does that mean? I don't really know, but I'm keen to watch how it unfolds.
And the timing of you stepping back, is it a good time?
Look, there's obviously a lot of things that go into that, from family pressures in one shape or form. Kate's mum is in her 90s, and she very much wants to spend time with her. Our own children, I mean, the best we can hope for in the short term is possibly grand dogs as opposed to grandchildren, but maybe they'll develop with their own homes, and perhaps even want to see a bit more of their parents, perhaps. But I guess we still have some vitality in us, I hope, and have a chance for a kind of another throw of the dice, in a sense. I mean, you'll understand that working for a charity in Cambodia doesn't make you a rich man, and we're very lucky being able to spend a lot of time here and being able to survive on renting our house out or those kind of things. But if we want to live back in our own communities, that's an expensive thing to do. So while it might still be cheaper for me to fly to Cambodia to have my dentistry here, it's probably not a sustainable solution to our own finances. So there is, I would have to admit, some small financial reason to say that after all this time, there's probably we need to look at some other things that we can do. I feel terribly self-conscious when I say that, and selfish, because I've asked so much of so many people, and then to be actually what many people might say, well, you're throwing the towel in, aren't you? No, not doing that at all. I reach retirement age at this age this year anyway, so not that that's a barrier any longer, but you can see how I'm rambling on to answer that question, that I'm struggling with it. But I recognise that there are other people very capable who at this point can take it on, take it over.
And if you were to talk to Ed Shuttleworth in 2009 and offer him some advice around setting up SeeBeyondBorders, or life, what advice would you have?
Well, he probably wouldn't listen anyway. Is the truth of it, and So I'd probably ask him to listen a bit more closely. I'd probably ask him to kind of go slowly and rely on his own thinking process. You know, not to be too pushed by others who might have different motivations, have different insights. You know, be true to what you always dreamed of, which was a better opportunity and future for Cambodians, and just stick with that and take it slowly, reflect, and work with everybody closely, work with the community, trust the people that you have working for you. And there's a lot that can be achieved. Probably one more thing, pay a bit more attention to the fundraising would probably be another. But I mean, even today, we have some great people who are involved in that. I don't think I could ever persuade even the Shuttleworth of 2009 to take an interest in fundraising. It's all been about how we have a program that works. But yeah, lots of advice, but I know he'll want to fall into his own pitfalls along the way. So,
Okay. Thank you very much for your time today.
Ian, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for talking to me and asking me such difficult questions. So